Good morning, everyone, and welcome to P3 2024. It's great to be back here again with all of you, and what a great 2 days we have planned for everyone. I'm also extremely pleased to report that we have officially sold out this year, so thank you to everyone who's attending. Before we get into it, I'd like to first take a minute to thank our sponsors, our board of directors, the members of our working groups and committees, our distinguished speakers, and everyone who pitched in over the past year to share their expertise and valuable time to help advance the evolution, growth, and promotion of P3s. The tremendous work we've achieved this year and the depth and breadth of our conference program is because of all of you. We truly are Canada's infrastructure conference. In fact, we are the only conference that brings all facets of this industry together at one time to discuss delivering our country's broader infrastructure needs. I look forward to the robust discussions over the next 2 days and encourage you to keep these conversations going in boardrooms and on job sites in the months to come. Now, I'd like to take a moment in the spirit of truth and reconciliation. We acknowledge the land we gather on is the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. Toronto is on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I encourage you all to take a moment to reflect on these acknowledgements. Now, the Council has undertaken significant policy and advocacy work since we last gathered together. In August, we released Modernizing Canada's Approach to P3s. This policy primer sets out a series of considerations and 8 key recommendations for policy and decision makers. The emphasis is on collaboration and practical solutions to help create resilient, efficient, and long-lasting infrastructure for Canadians. We are also expanding our definition of what a Canadian P3 can be, while remaining true to the 4 essential attributes. A lot has been accomplished, but we have more to do. That's why we're hosting 2 workshops today directly tied to expanding the work of our P3 primer, including a discussion on how we can potentially add private finance to alliance and IPD models. We've also published 2 important documents devoted to municipal infrastructure. This work was undertaken by our Municipal Engagement Advisory Group. The first is a policy primer aimed at empowering municipal governments on how they can unlock the potential of P3s for community building, infrastructure delivery, and asset management. It contains recommendations for all levels of government and is meant to work in tandem, where appropriate, with others such as the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and their Municipal Growth Framework. That's why we're very excited to have London Mayor Josh Morgan, the new chair of FCM's Big City Mayors Caucus, with us this morning to deliver our opening keynote. Lastly, we have updated our public-private partnerships, a guide for municipalities, which contains the latest information on procurement models, best practices, and mini case studies. It's our hope that these tools will help support the development of a municipal pipeline over the coming years. Now, to strengthen our policy and advocacy efforts, we knew hard data was essential, particularly for conversations with politicians, ministry officials, and media. We also wanted insight into what Canadians think about infrastructure and its delivery. All of us are very familiar with infrastructure-related reports and the big numbers that they warn us about. Our governments have massive debts, and they're hampering future infrastructure investment and economic growth. In many ways, we are behind. We still have Indigenous communities without access to clean drinking water, without adequate housing and access to healthcare near them. We have municipalities on the front lines of directly delivering services to Canadians who are struggling to balance budgets, meet growing needs, and keep tax increases to a minimum. On top of all this pressure, we have an urgent need for new affordable housing. Canada's population is now 41 million, an increase of 1.3 million in just 1 year. 333,000 of us moved from one province or territory to another last year. All of this is creating pressure for new infrastructure and services, especially for housing. But the cost of additional housing is not just borne by the new homeowner. New housing drives up demand for more water pipes, new roads, new transit routes, and more public services. We partnered with Abacus Data to conduct public opinion polling, asking Canadians for their thoughts on a variety of infrastructure-related issues. We wanted to test a number of assumptions many of us in this room and in political backrooms have about infrastructure and public-private partnerships. Why? We need data. We need data to grow this country's pipeline of projects, and we need it to successfully refute untrue and out-of-date arguments against P3s. We need compelling and credible arguments based on real-world examples to drive home how Canada can deliver better infrastructure that delivers the best value for taxpayers. Put simply, we need to move past the anecdotal and into the actual. To find out if there's a disconnect between what Canadians want and believe and how governments are approaching infrastructure challenges. Abacus Data took our questions to 1,700 Canadians in late September, and some of the findings, they might surprise you. Right now, what Canadians think about the state of public infrastructure, it's a bit of a mixed bag. 31% of Canadians think it's in good to excellent condition. 37% think it's in fair shape. And 28% think it's in poor or very poor condition. So not great, but not an emergency situation either, at least not right now. However, they clearly see trouble on the horizon. 88% of Canadians are very pessimistic about Canada's infrastructure in the near future. They believe infrastructure will deteriorate and require significant repairs and upgrades. What's driving that concern? Well, 92% of Canadians said they believe our rapidly growing population will increase demand for new and improved public infrastructure. And 63% of Canadians are not confident governments can cover the costs of building and maintaining infrastructure without raising taxes. Confidence is particularly low for those who already believe infrastructure is failing: older Canadians, women, Conservative and NDP voters, and those who live in rural areas. So, with that result, we asked Canadians how they would prefer governments handle the financial cost and risk of building, repairing, and maintaining their infrastructure. Do they want governments to go it alone, or are they supportive of the private sector and others being involved? I think we can see here that Canadians who have an opinion are being pragmatic. But there's also a significant number that are on the fence. We know they believe they will need a lot of new infrastructure soon. We know that they are confident governments cannot deliver this without raising taxes. And we know no one wants higher taxes. Canadians get it. They understand to get what they will need, governments need to partner with the private sector to help share the burden, the cost, and the investments required. This polling supports the recommendations made in our recent policy and research reports for governments to make greater use of private finance to stretch scarce tax dollars further. Everyone wins, especially Canadians, when the public and private sectors work together. Now, in this room, we as an industry know the tremendous value of including private finance and allocating risk to the party best suited to manage it. And now we know for certain that almost half of all Canadians understand there is value in including it too. But we will always need to caution governments, the media, and the public. The solution we offer is P3, not P-free. I know there are some in this room that believe we have a branding problem. So we also wanted to test how Canadians responded to the term public-private partnerships. To do this, Abacus Data created a split question. So half of the Canadians they polled were asked how they felt about P3s, to build, fund, operate, and maintain public infrastructure in Canada. The other half were asked how they felt about a combination of government and private investments and other resources to build, fund, operate, and maintain public infrastructure. To be clear, both these options are P3s. What we're testing here is the name. Now, I see many of you may be leaning forward. It's very interesting results. Please feel free, take a picture. Despite some very negative headlines and a project pipeline that is not as robust as it was 10 years ago, close to half of the Canadians we polled are supportive of P3s. And when we drop the name and focus on the concept, the essence of what P3s do, that supportive number jumps to 60%. Now, before I move on, for those eagle eyes in the audience that notice some of the numbers might not add up perfectly to 100, what you're seeing is correct. It's common in polling, and it's due to the rounding of results, but I assure you, the numbers are solid. This data is good news. Clearly, the private sector is not the boogeyman that some would like Canadians to believe. This is a message that our politicians, our ministry officials, the media, and the public need to hear. Now, I know it's possible some of you may see this as evidence that P3s needed a name change, but bear with me here. What this data also shows us is that there is room here to convert hearts and minds. 25 to 32% of all the Canadians Abacus Data polled are essentially undecided. Negative headlines, or positive ones for that matter, have not reached them or swayed them either way. That means we have an opportunity to convince these undecided Canadians that our product is a solution to Canada's infrastructure woes. The undecideds may also demonstrate that more than a quarter of all Canadians don't really care or understand how the infrastructure they depend on every day actually works, who built it, who funds it, or ultimately, who is responsible to maintain it. They just care that it works when they need it. And that also works in our favor. Another small detail to add, a P3 model is preferred wholeheartedly across all demographics, from Gen Z to baby boomers. So finally, we found something that all generations can agree on. Now, if we drill down deeper into the results, we find some truly interesting nuggets. We've all seen the negative news releases or heard the comments made by some public sector union heads about P3s. Well, our polling suggests their members feel otherwise. Clearly, they see that both public and private can and should coexist together in these spaces. This information is especially important as we work with municipalities to explore the greater use of P3s to address their infrastructure needs. Across Canada, there is significant support for the concept of what P3s do in all regions. Saskatchewan and Manitoba show the highest support. This dovetails with the fact that 98% also said they believe public infrastructure in Canada is deteriorating and requires significant repairs and upgrades in the near future. We can also see that more work can be done in Atlantic Canada to encourage broader support for P3s. Given 91% said they believe public infrastructure will need significant repairs and upgrades in the near future, and 66% said they don't have confidence governments can handle the costs without raising taxes. Finally, our last data set peers into the political crystal ball. Again, we can see supporters of Canada's three main federal political parties are overwhelmingly supportive of governments not going it alone when it comes to sharing financial cost and risk with the private sector. The results were close, but the NDP voters surveyed were the most supportive. So what does all this mean? And how should we use this information? This data will underpin the Council's advocacy and communications efforts going forward. They are proof points to support the policy recommendations we make to governments and to industry. They set a benchmark to measure how our message resonates over time and if Canadians shift in their viewpoints. And they give us permission to adapt, to be even more credible voice on Canadian infrastructure issues. Right now, I would argue it also tells us two very important things. First, We need to focus on how P3s provide real and tangible benefits to taxpayers and the public purse. Second, we need to put to rest the idea that we can solve how P3s are viewed in Canada by simply calling them by another name. Clearly, our data shows there's no need to do this. The name and the model concept are supported already. And let's be honest, changing a name fools no one. It's a costly exercise that detracts us from evolving the actual mechanics of the model and from just being better communicators. Some jurisdictions have tried it already. We've had AFP in Ontario and PF2 in the UK. And really, did anything change? Now, in closing, here's my pitch to all of you. We have made great strides as of late getting our house in order, but we cannot change the narrative of Canada without you. Together, we need to tell our story better. We need you to be better communicators, to see beyond shovels in the ground and the ribbon cutting, to telling the stories of the people who will and are benefiting from P3 projects. We also need you to get more comfortable about being uncomfortable. Welcome the chance to answer those difficult questions from the media or to reach out to correct the record. Don't be scared to enter the debate and stand up publicly for the industry. Finally, I can't say enough how deeply grateful we are for the members who have given so generously of their time and expertise to support the Council this year. We want more of you to get involved. There is more work to be done. That's why we're hosting 3 workshops at P3 2024 today. And it's why we've created the new Policy Network membership tier to help advise and guide the Council's policy, research, and advocacy efforts. If you're interested in joining our founding members, ACON, COLAS, Concert Infrastructure, Ellis Dawn, Green Infrastructure Partners, and Kiewit Development, please reach out. Now with that, I hope you enjoy your 2 days, and we'll move on with the program. Thank you.